Welcome to the Pick and Roll Podcast. This is Pick and Roll Podcast number 8.
This is number 8.
As always, you can follow us at PAR Podcast. Email us at pickandrollpodcast@gmail.com. We do have pickandrollpodcast.com.
Up
rolling and
alive.
cracking.
Yes.
There goes the early. There it is.
It's going to be there, dog.
We're sitting here with some of my partners from back in the day. We're having a fellas night tonight. You know, Big Sean is on the grill, so we out here chilling. Like I said, as always, you know, feel free to give us feedback on the show. Send us emails. See us on Twitter. I think that we would be remiss to not start by talking about the Mike Brown situation.
Yeah.
A lot of activity on Twitter. We'll look at it from a number of different angles. As we go to record some very interesting developments today, and we don't want to time the show too much, but the video.
Yeah.
And how let's kind of start there and talk about how, first of all, I do believe that all of this has been very strategic.
Okay.
Everything involving the public relations element of this issue has been very, very, very strategic. Okay. So at this point, what was gained by, and do we know that that's him in the video?
I think it's been confirmed. What I mean by confirmed, I mean, loosely confirmed, meaning you have people on the ground who are doing the investigative journalism side, and so they're confirming before we get the official answer from mainstream media. So I'm going to go with that as being a confirm. And, you know, as a matter of fact, there is another video that shows the other young man, who's the young man with the dreads. Mm-hmm. He's also in the video. So that has been confirmed that it is Michael Brown in the store. But the fact that we're seeing the video, I think, is more of the issue.
Why wouldn't the video have been released earlier in the week?
Well, the video never needed to be released, and the police chief exposed that fact, which is why I sort of disagree with you when you said everything has been strategic. It's been a bumbling effort, in my view. It's been a bumbling, dumbass, stupid. And, you know, and the reason why it comes off as bumbling and stupid is because I think we're talking about a police chief who is used to operating without anybody paying attention to him.
Or any reproach.
So there's no reason for him to ever get it right. And so he's not getting it right in the public eye. So we see this video only because they chose to view it. I mean, they chose to release it in an effort to slander Mike Brown, or in an effort to help the pending case, which they all know is coming. But the police chief admitted that the cop that killed Mike Brown was not looking for a suspect, did not suspect Mike Brown in that moment. So there's no reason.
Had it even been called in at that point?
No.
It had?
He got called in like 5 minutes before he ran into that guy in the middle.
Oh,
of the street.
You mean the robbery?
Yeah,
yes, right. The robbery had been called in, but that officer himself was not looking for a suspect. That cop himself was not looking at Mike Brown as the potential suspect for the robbery. So the problem that we face is, why are we seeing the video? That's a separate case.
And I say that it's strategic. You're right. I mean, it has been a bumbling effort up until, but you have to recognize the fact that when certain agencies and certain people began to get involved and they started to gather facts, there had to be some type of strategic decision to get on the right side of this from the public relations side.
Definitely, but that's later. I'm talking about from stem to stern. Like in the beginning, it's just, you know, this guy's tripping all over himself. And then he goes out and admits that this police officer was not even thinking about that robbery. That's like a watershed moment in the entire case to me. Because it'd be one thing if he's approaching him as a potential assailant, approaching him as a suspect, approaching him as a hostile person in the street. He wasn't doing that.
He approached him because he was walking in the street.
Right. Period. Point blank.
Wow.
And that's what it was.
The shadow that it cast, though, is
on
the character of Mike Brown.
Right.
Whether he was already in an aggressive mood.
Typically, in a case like this, we would only hear about something like that by the time we got to court. By the time we get to court and the character of Mike Brown, sadly, does come to question, that's when we would hear about it. Those sorts of things, a judge, any self-respecting judge, would not allow into court proceedings because they're not. It doesn't matter. It wouldn't matter what was going on in this case. But here we are now, and it's into evidence. Even if the judge, whenever they decide to take this to trial, even if the judge does not want that video played in court proceedings, whatever the hell else, the American people have seen this video now. So whatever jury pool that they get has seen this video of Mike Brown being aggressive, being in criminal behavior. And so that's going to cloud whatever jury comes to make the decision, they're going to look at Mike Brown that way no matter what. We had a whole campaign going about why the mass media depicted Mike Brown as some kind of a gangster.
Right.
What was it called? What picture will they show? Whatever. I forget what the hashtag is now. But
with the two pictures together.
Two pictures together, right?
Right.
So we had that going, trying to force the media to portray this guy at least in a neutral light. And the video kills all of that.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as neutrality now. And that was done. That probably was done strategically.
So it clearly was done in an effort to gain sympathy for mainstream America, because I think that mainstream America walked into the understanding of the situation thinking, oh, he had to do something.
He had to be doing something.
He had to have done something.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Which completely undermines the inhumanity with which not only the actual incident, but what happened immediately after, him laying in the street for 4 hours.
4+ hours.
Bleeding out on the streets.
Thrown in the back of a police vehicle, not an ambulance. They would have video of that too. There's video of him. There was no ambulance called. The cop that murdered Mike Brown did not fill out his own incident report. When you discharge that firearm as a police officer, there's paperwork involved in that.
Serious paperwork.
He didn't fill out his own. Everything was every protocol that we understand for typical police work was either foregone or completely messed up all along the way from stem to stern.
Right.
And so now here we are with a situation where people who understand what happened, it's almost like we can't discuss the issue at its heart. We have to deal with all the the bullshit in
the murkiness involved. I mean, and this is I think that this is an exposure for a lot of things. This is obviously an exposure for relationships between the police and young black men, but also it's an exposure in the bureaucracy involved in law enforcement. It's also an exposure of the media and how the media has the ability, if anybody's been paying attention, this story has been very carefully crafted. And it's funny how in the first couple of days after this happened, the emphasis, I would say the protests at least, the emphasis was strictly about the looting. And the reports are involving the looting that it's been, since that first night at least, it's been relatively minimal.
Well, there was looted last night too. But once again, it was minimal.
The point of emphasis was on the fact that the store that got looted last night was the store that this incident supposedly happened in.
Yeah, and that's, again, adding more muck, more mire, more confusion, more smokescreen to the real issue, which is when that cop pulled up on Mike Brown and his homeboy. Sadly, I don't remember that guy's name.
Yeah,
is he didn't see citizens, he didn't see members of that community, he didn't see human beings.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I believe that. I mean, there was probably a shift in the scuffle, whatever the scuffle was about.
Right.
There was a shift to where he felt entitled to take this man out. You know what I'm saying? These smaller communities, man, that's the scariest part about it for me, is these small communities all across the country where police forces and police chiefs and even, like you said, the bureaucracy, the mid-level and even higher reaches of local government operate almost autonomous. You know, so there's nobody to watch over them.
Right.
If social media was not as active, this would have been carried out. You know, boom, 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 boom. It would have been a story for Ferguson to tell for years and years and years, but there would have been little to no justice. And
I think early on it seemed as though the effort to kind of undermine the story was already there, because we were getting information from Twitter. We were getting so much information outside of the mainstream networks that was I haven't seen anything like that before.
Yeah, me either.
I mean, imagine what if Twitter was around during Katrina.
Yeah.
You know, per se, if the infrastructure wasn't affected and the towers were still up.
Right.
I wonder how Katrina would have been perceived.
Right. And you know, we've got a kind of a look at how some of those large calamities would have been represented with Egypt. I mean, excuse me, with Egypt. I mean,
Twitter in Egypt.
Well, yeah, when they had the revolution.
Oh
there,
no, I thought you was talking about like
no. When the Twitter feed that came during that revolution, there were people in that square.
Yeah,
around. I mean, all we see is like a bonfire,
right?
But there are people on Twitter flooding Twitter with what's really going on. And I'm not saying that the people of Ferguson or social media types across the country took a cue from them, but that tool was there. That tool was ready, available, and people used it to the best of their ability. And because of that, the world is a different place. The country is a different place because of that. And I fully believe that.
Yeah,
I fully believe that we're different now.
And when you look at what's going on in Gaza, it's a similar situation. You know, the story was being painted a certain way, but having people on the ground who were, you know, ambivalent to the whole political process that could be objective about the entire thing. They tried to give people a real sense of what's going on.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the reporters being arrested.
Okay.
The gentleman, and mind you, we're in my buddy's garage having this.
Right, you hear the crickets?
Having this.
Sounds
yeah, exactly.
good.
You can hear the crickets.
Old man in the garage.
The two reporters were arrested. One from the Washington Post, I believe, and one from Huffington Post. And ultimately, subsequently released. But the fact that they were arrested, not because they were charged with anything, or it seemed as though they were just there.
Yeah. And
it harkens back to the fact that this was a concerted effort by law enforcement to not only cover up what was really happening,
right,
but to also try to control the amount of information that was going out about this. And actually, it seemed as though they were attempting to intimidate the media types.
Right. And that point is why it's like people are relatively upset. So, well, the story didn't get people didn't start caring about the story in mainstream media until one of their own got arrested. There's two ways to look at that. Yes, true, and you can run with that. But also, you got to look at it a little bit bigger. It's one thing to have a struggle between the people of a municipality and the police and have that gain some kind of publicity. It's another reason for a police force to try to squash the story. That does make it bigger. And even though we don't want to just go along with what, you know, people didn't start caring. CNN, MSNBC didn't start caring until one of their own got arrested. That's not really the point. When you see a police force intentionally trying to squash the story, trying to make sure that it does not make national news, that's when everybody should pounce. And that's what happened here. And so I'm uneasy about, you know, saying blaming mainstream media or saying that they're weak-willed in exposing real stories. I think they do that every day of the week. But in a situation like this, yeah, they're gonna react a little bit differently when one of their own is in the back of a police vehicle.
Right.
But I think that was necessary too. You know, well, they didn't care when it was just black folks being, you know, yeah, they did. Yes, they did. But when the police force is trying to eliminate the story from the news wire, now we know that it's bigger than just that one incident. Right. It's a systemic issue.
Do you think that them holding back on announcing the officer, now there's a procedure that's involved in that. Do you think that was more about safety, or was it more about the safety of his family, or was it more about them trying to control the story as much as possible?
And that is outside of the obvious. That is one of the things that pissed me off the most. That is flat out. I mean, okay, yeah. What's more against the law than murdering an innocent man?
An unarmed man.
But that is against the law.
Yeah.
You can't do that. And so when faced with, hey, you have to do that. That's what the law states. They said, no, we're not doing it. Wait a minute. And so it changes the nature of the way you see law and order in this country. It's not Ferguson. It changes the way you see police officers in this country. It's not Ferguson. Ferguson on a lower level is literally telling cameras, we're not doing it. Yeah, I know the law states that I have to do it, but guess what? I'm not doing it. And
We know that,
what y'all gonna do about it?
Right, and we know that the police will actively protect each other. We've always heard the stories of
thin blue line.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody harms a policeman or things of that nature, and while they're in custody, they get beat down or something like that. I just think that what worries me about it is it's acknowledged and it's common knowledge that is law and that it's customary procedure for this to happen,
right?
And for it to be done so flagrantly, as well as the flagrant nature of how the police were acting.
Yeah,
and the military, the whole military element of what was going on and aiming the assault rifles at people that were protesting peacefully. It's almost as though I dare you to say something.
Right.
It seemed as though it was very arrogant.
It was very arrogant, and it shows you what the reality is behind the laws and rights that this country grants you. It's not real, because at any moment it could be taken away. So when the Constitution says that you have the right to assemble and protest peacefully, that's a right that everybody has. There's no such thing as not having the right if you're an American citizen. That local police force said, well, you can't. Wait a minute. At what point in time do you become the person that makes that kind of decision about what I want to do? And that is the part that it angers me the most, is because the facade or the lie about, well, you have these rights, it was exposed in that moment. It was exposed in that moment. So the police officer, the police chief says, you guys can protest. That's fine with me, but you can only do it until 9 o'clock. That's not in the rules, bro. You don't make the rules on that. Well, and then when they did show up, well, you can only do it over here. Okay, fine. They was in the street. Get them out the street.
You disrupting traffic.
Yeah, okay, cool. Now, now we back in the rules again. But then they're gonna say, well, all right, time for y'all to go. Wait a minute. There ain't no time period on that. Unless you want to get together and lobby and change the United States Constitution to put a time limit on it, that's still my rights. I don't see how you assert yourself and insert yourself into a situation to where you can make that choice for me as an American citizen. That is the part that bothers me.
Let's talk about the response from the president. And we know that this is going to be spun. Conservatives are going to spin this to try to make Obama look weak, and his response was weak. But at the same time, try to support what the police were doing, what the military were doing, and all of that.
Right.
I didn't see the video of his conference. I didn't read the transcript of his conference, but I can guess that it was an attempt to bring people together, and there may have been there might have been some light ether for the cop that actually did what he did. But what did you think about that?
There's a few things going on. So he's not going to give us the response that we want, because we do not fully understand the office.
And what response do you think we should get?
We wanted names, places, and things. We wanted
heads to roll.
We wanted direct talk, and that doesn't work from that office.
And he hasn't been there yet.
Yeah, and that's not the way that works.
Okay.
So right, so what our expectations were slightly out of bounds, but we were not wrong for wanting it. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The office of the United States, President of the United States, does not work like that. Take Barack Obama out of the situation, you put anybody in there, and they cannot respond that way because there's a larger machine at work. Now, two, he could have been more direct and specific about the situation, saying that, speaking in general terms, left people wanting. Okay, and I think that the president was he's playing it a little bit safe because he had work to do. And the president has been notorious for a chess game, but it's analysis paralysis at this point. This was a situation where he should have stepped to the mic, said what he needed to say, gave details about how he felt, and left it there. There would have been no legitimate criticism. That's another thing. There would have been no legitimate criticism if he was direct in that moment. None. Everybody criticizing the president about what he said about the situation would have exposed themselves as criticizing the president about speaking about an obvious situation.
Right.
And that's an opportunity that I think he lost.
So, National Moment of Silence happened earlier this week. basically engineered on a large scale by Twitter.
Absolutely.
And across I don't know the specific numbers, but I know that we had one in Detroit here.
I think there were something like 36 states, something like that.
There's also been some discussion. I ran across something last night about there being cause for an economic blackout in September on one day. I don't know how much meat. I don't know how much.
We tried that. We tried that with oil companies. It doesn't work.
And I think, but I'm looking at it. I'm trying to figure out what the end game of this is. What is the end game of this? I mean, ultimately, we would like for African American people to be able to take a step back and be able to react to this in a positive way. But at the same time, it should be a catalyst for change. It should be a catalyst for revolution and a change in behavior.
Yeah, I think most of that is done. I think most of that is done because people are aware. Mm-hmm. So people are going to follow this every step of the way, leading up to the court case, leading up to everything, every detail. So most of the work is done, meaning people are aware. That's a big step. Mm-hmm. That's a big step. Now, whatever happens at the culmination of the court case, now we're talking about a different issue.
True.
Now we're talking about this issue. Innocent or guilty, now we're talking about a different issue. Are we going to drop it? If he's guilty and goes to jail for 50 years, all right, on to the next.
Right.
We back partying?
Right.
Or if he's guilty, are we going to tear this bitch down? There's the decision. But I think a lot of the work has been done because we're aware now.
You have something, Mark?
I had a question on what changes do you think and on whose part needs to change?
I think the behavior of the police, obviously. Okay. I mean, we all have examples of situations where police have been out of line. Yeah. And with the power that they have, obviously, when they get out of line, the circumstances from it could be very crazy. I think being more willing to come forward with these situations, being able to hold the police accountable in a different way is very important, too.
We got to figure out a way to make the law apply to police officers as well.
One thing that I've been hearing a lot of in terms of the punditry out there is, why are black people mad about this when black people kill each other all the time?
Now
it's weak.
Yeah, that's not legit.
It's not.
That's intellectually dishonest.
Right.
Because black people kill what's close to them, same as white people kills what's close to them. In heavily dense Asian areas, Asian on Asian crime, and that's almost,
it's a socioeconomic question, right, more than it is a question of race.
It's a proximity question,
right?
So it's false hustle. It sounds like a legitimate argument, but it's really, you're not trying to even be interesting with something like that,
right?
And that's a firebomb, right? It's a firebomb.
To white people. Who's near you,
right? And that's what the numbers say. And if you really dive into it and do the work to find out, okay, what does murder look like in this country? It's typically same race on same race, and that is most likely split up to where people live.
Yeah.
Saying, well, what about black on black crime is trying to insert an argument where it has no place, and that's what we get a lot of, and we're getting a lot of that from mainstream America. We're getting a lot of that from our own too, which is most frustrating because once again it adds more confusion into the legitimate argument we're trying to have about the relationship between black and brown people all over the country and the police. If we can stick to a specific argument, we get a lot more out of it.
So let's look forward. We have to believe that at some point, I would say in the next 72 to 96 hours, he'll be charged.
No.
You don't think so?
No. We're not going to get... let me take that back. I disagree. I don't think we'll get an official charge. It'll be cold outside, bro.
Why do you say that?
He's not even in St. Louis right now. He's not even in Missouri. He left town. He was allowed to leave the state. No, he took off.
So he hasn't been put on leave, unpaid leave,
maybe
paid
administrative,
leave,
but he was already gone. He was already gone. They're letting you further know that we're not going to handle this responsibly. as a municipality, as a police force.
The problem is that we gave them a bigger window. By us cutting up, we gave them a bigger window.
The emphasis went away from him.
Yeah,
You think so?
Now what we can do, what they can do as a police force and as a unit is, we can't deal with this right now because all of our efforts have to be on the street right now, calming everybody down and getting the situation itself calmed down. So if in the middle of this right now, I bring out some charges, it's going to start everything back up.
I see what you're saying. Bring out some charges. It reignites everything.
If I don't give you the charge that you want right now,
Yeah.
it's going to reignite.
We deal with that. That's a good point. That's a good point.
We're going to push all that aside. We're not going to deal with him.
Right. I hate the reality of that, but it's still true. It's still real.
And what they do is they can flip that around. They, as the cops, or
Right.
if you want to say white folks, what they can do is flip that around and say, basically, until you niggas calm down.
Until we start dealing with you,
Yeah.
we can deal with
If
him.
we don't have to deal with you, then we can deal with the situation.
Yeah, that's
a good
that
point.
Sounds so. That's a good point. That sounds so nasty, but it is. You're
Go
probably
ahead.
right.
I hate to come back, but you started off with he said strategy. One of the things that I hate to say I laughed at is Ron Johnson.
Okay.
He's the captain of Missouri State Police.
Yes, right.
He's the
Or-
hometown guy from where it happened at. They brought him in to use him as the black guy to calm everything down.
Yes, they did.
That was the surprising fact when I got up this morning. It was like, oh, right. I couldn't even read the story. I was like, well, in my mind, and I'm kind of cynical, I guess, I thought that's what they get for trying to put this brother up here to try to quash y'all down without having any, what do you call it, any substance behind it. So this was just another thing where they say, oh, let's find a black guy and maybe they'll listen to him.
Yeah, right.
I agree with that.
That's exactly how I took
And
it.
I'm not mad at Ron Johnson. Technically, that's his job.
Right.
But I see the strategy
Right.
behind it.
I'm not mad at Ron Johnson. I'm not mad at the people for respecting it, but you see above the game what the game is.
Yeah.
To pacify the people, get them to calm down, send one of their own in there, not getting to the root of the issue. Just like you said, just to pacify.
It might calm them down.
Yep, that's a good point. And I think that's true. Even without hearing it from the police chief, I'm just going ahead and count it. I'm counting that as something he did intentionally. Yeah, I agree with that. So the governor did intentionally, whoever. Right.
So
I agree.
It'll be curious to see what the nighttime actions look like over the course of the weekend. What the emphasis is going to be from the media. The police chief can't be sleeping at night right now.
No.
I mean, he's taking so many L's.
He's fired.
It's ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, he's not officially fired.
Yeah, I know,
yet.
but you're fired, dude.
Yeah.
You're fired.
I mean, from the governor to, I think that that long term, as long as we keep the pressure up, as long as we keep the right pressure up, I think that there will be categorical change within the framework there. But in the same token, it could all be a smokescreen as well.
I got a question for everybody. What I found interesting, and which I don't think we've seen on TV since probably the 60s, we saw a very visible rift between, and we're talking about black folks now, between the old guard and young folks. So when Al Sharpton and those guys had the thing at, it was at a church or whatever it was, down the street or down the way, there was a rally going on. There was young folks, and when asked, they don't come down here to talk to us. What are they doing? Well, they're not addressing our concerns. Now, meanwhile, Al Sharpton's doing his thing. He's doing his thing. He's calling out this and that. He's saying this and that. He's calling attention. That's basically his job description. But down the way, there's a group of young folks in Ferguson that are saying that they don't represent how we feel. When is the last time we saw that open of a rift between an uprising of black people? Number one, a public discussion about what's going on between black people in a specific community and the police or white folks in general, When is the last time we seen something like that? The only time, I mean, and this is just me being a trimming the hedges student, we remember the rift between what Martin Luther King was doing and SNCC, to where they wanted to be a little more militant, and Dr. King was obviously, nonviolent. I remember those stories. I remember that struggle, and that's where we have Black Panther movement come out of that. We have, a lot of things that come out of that rift. How do y'all feel about that?
I think that Jesse, I think he arrived yesterday.
Yeah.
And my wife actually sent me a text like, what is he doing there?
Wow.
What is he doing? I mean, I think that his contribution, quote unquote, to trying to resolve the matter is basically being dismissed at this point.
Wow.
I don't think that they even have the voice to be able to make any change in this situation, because people have an understanding that Jesse and Al have their own interests here. They do. They have their own interests. Their interests could be economic. Their interests could be purely political. Their interests could be just simply to keep their name alive. But every time there's an incident like this, they may get involved, but it doesn't evoke real change.
I mean, they were questioning Al Sharpton about being an informant to the police at one time, which we know to be fact. So it's like, that those sorts of that's social media, by the way. Mm-hmm. Unearthing those raw truths about somebody, you know what I'm saying? That having to face that sort of question is something I don't think he's used to, especially not by his own. You know what I mean? What I mean by his own being black folks.
For
you know
sure.
what I mean? I don't think that's something he is used to at all. But I think I agree with you on that.
It's a changing of the guard, but I always harken back to the fact that we have a responsibility. We do what we do privately to contribute to the upliftment of black people in this country, whether it be what you do with your family, what you may do at work, if your work involves that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's very good to see black people be angry, but I'm also of the mindset that we have to make change from this. Whether that change be being more involved in the things that are going on in our community from the perspective of making sure that we're protecting our own community.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Making sure that we should be policing, as men, we should be policing our own communities, to me.
I agree.
Because at the end of the day, that is what's been pushed to the side. So to even give this policeman the opportunity to be able to come in and do this, and for us as a nation to not be upset enough about it to attend national moment of silence and things of that nature is unacceptable to me.
So when we see the footage of Michael Brown laying in the street, right, and we see policemen walking over top his body,
that's your job.
Somebody should have ran up in there. What are y'all doing?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's one of the things that struck me. Like, people just stood and watched that.
But there's a fear.
Not saying that I'm Billy Badass and like I'm gonna go choke the cop out. You feel me?
Right.
But it was something that was like, man, wait a minute. Nobody can say anything. Shell shock.
But we're afraid.
If you step out there, they say you ain't gonna be laying right next.
Yeah, you're
we're
right.
afraid. We have and we have our own. I made a friend recently that talks about personal interests a lot. And we have our own personal interests, whether those interests be economics, the risk that's involved in going out there at that point.
Yeah.
Weighed heavy on a lot of people.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And I think, like I said, I think it goes back to the fact that as men, we have an obligation to take a step back and look at this situation and say, okay, this young man was murdered in our neighborhood. If this had happened in a Jewish neighborhood, an Italian neighborhood, the situation may look different on the ground right now, but we wouldn't stand for it.
Right. There would be some changes made. And you know what, though? It is in that light where I don't believe we've changed very much, even from the days of lynchings. There were still folks. There were still folks that walk. Hey, walk. Get in the house.
Because we still have to be a part. We still have to play our role.
And the fear involved. You go out there and try to stop them from lynching that boy, you getting lynched too.
And that lynch may not be physical.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I mean, us speaking out about this, if we spoke out about it a certain way and it filtered back towards what we do for a living, who knows? Right. I mean, if we was to have this conversation and be very inflammatory, what would we be risking? in terms of mainstream society. And I think that we have to get above that fear.
Right.
You know, because
Look at it this way. It's a thing of, in the end, it all comes down to control.
certainly.
Every last bit of it comes down to control. And in the end, what we are known, what we know, and what we've been taught our whole lives, and the way it's always been for black folks in this country is, no matter what you do, somebody else still has the control.
Yeah.
That's why in the end they had to shoot Martin Luther, all these assassinations, because these certain individuals started to gain control.
Right.
So you have to stop that. So in the end, it always comes down to that. And like you're saying, if we all went out and we spoke out and we protested and we did peacefully and we did all this right now, what's going to happen? In the end, they're going to turn around, you're going to show up at work, and they'll be like,
Right. They still will do something to assert
yeah,
that
you're
level
gonna
of
show up at
control.
work.
And I agree with that.
Some reason, you don't have a job no more. You know, there's a reason why you don't have a job anymore.
Right.
You know?
And for whatever reason, I mean, it could be painted however.
Yep. So but that's what we know going into it. So that's partially what stops.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
statement and a question. Statement being, well, I guess the question is, how do we bridge the gap between those youth and those elders as far as combining to do something about it? And one, I mean, and my statement is, anger without direction is foolish.
True.
I don't agree with that totally. I don't agree with that. I think anger has its own place, and anger needs to stay in anger. But how do we bridge the gap? It's a two-way street, and that's where the problem is. The old guard, and I hate using that term because there are many people who are from that era who are still who right. Well, when we use it for civil rights movement era of freedom fighters that are still active in the community, and I think that they still serve a purpose, but they have to, one, allow the youth into the process, and the youth also have to allow for the opportunity, for the understanding that they may not know everything yet. But here's the thing, and here's why that is still problematic for me, is because I don't know if the civil rights approach, and I mean civil rights of that era, is still a viable approach, meaning through legislation, meaning through protesting, meaning through, I don't know if these tools that protesting leads to changing of legislation. That's been the history of black folks' gains in this country. I'm not sure if that is still a legitimate way of progress, and I'm gonna tell you why. Because it works too slow. It definitely works too slow for the youth of this country. The youth of this country, young folks, want that change tomorrow, and they don't have to. They shouldn't have to explain why they want it tomorrow, because it's right. You don't have to wait on right, or you shouldn't have to wait on right. And civil rights era waited on right. They waited until it went to this court. They waited till it got up to that court. Waited till it got to the Supreme Court, and then we celebrated when the law was changed. But
That's a process, and that's a process.
That's a process. But is that process necessary? And that's the thing, like, or is it necessarily the right way to think about progress in this country? And that is where young people do not understand. Why do I have to wait for my rights as a United States citizen? That's today.
And then if you are part of this generation, what did all of that legislation actually do?
Right.
What did it actually do?
Still rights in quotes being violated day in and day out.
You gotta realize what world we live in now. We live in the immediate. Everything's immediate gratification.
Yes.
So if you
It isn't a thing of, well, we're gonna march on Capitol Hill and we're gonna stay here until there's legislation put in. Now, the upside to what the world is now is that if I want change, I can send it out on Twitter.
Yeah. I can start it right there.
Yeah. And it can, in 2 days, I can reach
Across the globe.
Yeah, I can reach across the globe where before you couldn't do that.
So that's why I say, and that's what I was getting to in terms of talking about the economic blackout. I don't know how far that's gone so far. It's just something I ran across today on Twitter. But that is immediate change.
Yes, it is.
That's immediate.
That's immediate.
If people have the discipline to not spend money for one day, the effects on the economy will be major.
It's already been stated.
Yeah, but
This is something that's been tried.
yeah, but here's the thing: we've done this before, even as a nation. Forget black folks. We've tried this before. Corporations are padded against actions like these. So when gas went up to $4.50 in the early 2000s, they tried a nationwide boycott. Don't buy no gas today. Well, so they just wrote it off on the insurance, and you pay for that anyway. So it doesn't matter. Well, that's the picture, that it doesn't matter if you don't spend money today. We're just gonna write that off.
Period.
And so an economic blackout, I would need more details on how that would represent any kind of change. Something like that. I'm not saying that I won't participate in solidarity, right? Because that's important too. But the outcome is I don't know if we're necessarily being misguided about what the outcome of something like that would really be.
What up?
The biggest problem with doing something like that, and the biggest problem with everything that's going on right now, is you got to think about mob mentality.
Yeah.
Right now, the protests down there are the thing to do. Okay, it's the thing to do. But you got to figure there's a certain percentage of that crowd who, in the end, come one day, they're going back to their own business.
Yeah, you're right. And
Yeah.
they're not gonna vote. They're not gonna do
And
anything.
that's why I asked, what is the end game? What is the end game for all of this?
But
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. That's the upside and the downside to where things are now. Is everything is immediate. So, like you were saying, you got 72, 96 hours worth of this being
Hot.
out there. Yeah.
Before the news cycle turn over and go back to focusing on Gaza and Robin Williams and Sophia Loren, because you know somebody else gonna die. You know it comes in threes. You know, maybe Mike Brown was the third. I don't know.
I didn't know Sophia Loren.
It's just that. It's like after that, it's like, you know what? We got other things to talk about.
NFL finna start.
But
Right.
us as black folks, if we should be staying with this, and that's what you're saying, your end game, is we should be staying with this and making sure it's staying front page in the media.
Yeah.
And making sure that change does happen with this. Like I said, 96 hours into this, you know what, man? This is cool. I might get down there after work tomorrow.
Right.
But I'm back to the business.
Right.
You know what?
Baby girl got basketball practice. I might get down there after I pick her up.
You know one thing that's not being discussed in this, and I don't know the history of Ferguson, but from what I can see, it seems as though the growing black population in Ferguson may have something to do with gentrification from cities. You know, and because I look around Detroit, and there have been school districts as school districts have been looking for leadership that are of minority because of their growing populations of minority students. And along with that, you have areas that have been solely focused on the protection of white people and the insulation of white people from what happens in the cities.
Absolutely.
And now you have a large African American population that are inside. I mean, even around Detroit, you know, when you think about Westland, you know, when I moved out to Westland, there weren't very many black people out there. But now Westland, there's a lot of African Americans that are in Westland and going to Westland schools.
Yep. Same things happen in Flushing in Genesee County.
Yeah,
area. Same
exactly.
thing. Same thing.
Carmen Ainsworth.
Absolutely. That's
And,
all full blown now.
you know, historically, these areas have been put together to insulate them from black people. Let's put it that way. So this whole situation, I think, is a result of that too.
Yes.
You know, because there is a belief, I believe that there is a belief that those people who are the old guard in these suburbs believe that they're taking over our area.
Absolutely.
We have to show force. We have to make sure that they feel uncomfortable.
Or they know their place.
Right. When I first moved out to Farm Hills, the night I moved into my house, I got pulled over by the police. And I was like, I was speeding, and I was wrong.
Okay.
But what he said to me was, I said, you know what? I didn't recognize the speed limit. I just moved out here. And he came back with his ticket, and he said, welcome to Farmington Hills. Right then. You know what I'm saying? So I don't think that's something that can be discounted as well.
Right.
Seriously.
No, and I think that's a real thing. I mean, I still live inside the city of Flint, but even certain sides of the city are, sectioning themselves off even within the city, let alone what's going on out county. And, there are still lines of demarcation. When you leave the city limits, to be on your P's and Q's because they're not playing.
Right.
And they are open about not playing.
Exactly.
And so, I think a lot of that, again, was played out in Ferguson on some of the cable news media outlets. It's definitely been played out on social media about the it's not even a rift. I mean, it's just the separation between minorities and white folks, just even in that same community. So community, excuse me. So they had a poll. Polls are usually shitty, but a poll that says
I've never been asked anything.
Yeah, polls are usually shitty, but is there a race problem in Ferguson? Of course, majority of white folks say absolutely not. Majority of black folks say absolutely so. So there's somewhat. I mean, there's a piece of the truth there that if a group of people feel that convincingly on differing sides of the issue, then there's obviously very little truth going on between those two sides.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's a big part of what we have across the country.
So we'll continue to watch the story. A lot of issues at work here, a lot of different viewpoints and things of that nature that are floating about. We'll continue to cover it and do the research to make certain that we're bringing you some true commentary about it, because we have a unique perspective. We've seen both sides. We've seen, we've seen mainstream America right in front of our faces, but we still try to hold on to what has gotten us up to this point. So. Right. Again, you can follow us at PAR Podcast. You can email us at pickandrollpodcast@gmail.com. Send us some responses about what you thought about tonight's show.
Yep. Check out the website.
Check out the website.
Podcast.com.
For sure. And that's going to do it. My name is Rod Wallace.
I'm Quinn Barrett.
And this is
The Pick and Roll.